Poulton le Fylde is extremely old. Not as old as some of the residents of Thornton Cleveland perhaps, but old enough to harbour its own outdated master and servant attitude, smell a bit strange and have some inconsiderate racist tendencies. None of which is true, of course, but hopefully it got your attention. At Poulton you'll find the thatched house, so called because it's got a tiled roof. To be fair, it was thatched once, back in Victorian times. It's difficult to say exactly how old the building is. Victorian, probably. But the pub's existence dates back at least as far as 1793, when, according to documents, it was owned by the Hardman family. There are suggestions that it was once called the Green Man. St. Chad's next door is no easier to date. It's named after a 7th century bishop apparently, although there are some who say that it stands on a Roman fort. More medieval documents recall the church as being around in 1094, although, like most churches around these parts, it was extensively remodelled in the 18th century. But that's not the sort of stuff we're after for this particular film. Dates and figures are all very well and all that, but we're after these sort of oddities that crop up in old churchyards, such as the pirate's grave. You can tell it belongs to a pirate because it's got a skull and crossbones on it. At least, that's what we believed when we were kids. Over the centuries, generations of children have reenacted the ritual of standing on the grave, reciting the Lord's Prayer backwards, and then depositing the contents of their noses on the stone slab. Actually, the legend suggests that they're only supposed to spit, but children can be very thorough when the occasion demands, in the hope that the pirate's ghost would rise from the ground and wreak havoc across the town. We can state from personal experience the ritual doesn't work. This is hardly surprising given that the grave actually belongs to Edward Sherdley, who died in 1711, and probably never got any closer to the sea than with a bucket and spade at Rossall. The skull and crossbones are more than likely just a Masonic symbol, which only goes to show that whilst in life being a Mason might pay dividends, in death it only results in kids covering your grave in phlegm. They like their crocuses at St. Chad's, and if you're here at the right time of year, then the graveyard is a riot of lilacs and creams. Unfortunately, we weren't. Poulton has a weend, which is a sort of passage with a lid on. In times gone by, it was known as Potts Alley. It's been renamed now to the more innocuous-sounding Chapel Street Court. But back in the day, it was notorious for the prostitutes who plied their wares to the sailors along its length. They weren't the only problem. In 1848, a health report described the passage as containing pigsties, rats, and a common privy in an indescribable state. More obvious history, less insalubrious perhaps, stands at the Wean's Market entrance, in the shape of the medieval fish slabs, whipping post, market cross, and stocks. They've all been replaced over the centuries, of course, by bits of junk salvaged from the local farmyards. But their ghosts still wander the town at night, haunting decrepit historians who want tourists to believe that they're the originals. They're not. Poulton's historic facade is as much a sham as Barbara Cartland's was. Time for an attempted murder story, by which I mean a story about an attempted murder and not an attempt at a story, although it is. In 2011, Andrew and Margaret Castle, both in their 60s at the time, found their marriage under increasing stress. As often happens when relationships start to break down, Mr. Castle decided to take up a new hobby, one that would keep him occupied in his garage out of earshot of all the nagging. The pastime he chose, however, wasn't building model ships out of matchsticks as you might expect. Instead, he set about constructing a chair for his wife. A chair that was wired up to the mains and capable of sending 240 volts coursing through her suddenly animated body. As the court later heard, once the chair was completed, he invited Margaret into his workshop for a quiet chat and a sit-down. Unaware of his plan, she complied, but stood up again before he'd had chance to throw a switch. Undeterred, he hit her over the head with a cosh. In the ensuing melee, she escaped. When the police turned up, they found the couple scrapping in the street. Historically, the residents of Poulton have always enjoyed a good scrap. When the Vikings arrived, intent on rape and pillage one Shrove Tuesday morning centuries ago, the local housewives chased them out of town, wielding the frying pans they'd been using for their pancakes. Spool forward through history and join the Jacobite uprising, whereas other folk in Lancashire compliantly shared their food and lodgings with Bonnie Prince Charlie's rebels. Mr. Physic of Poulton was reported to have barricaded himself inside his house, determined to resist any attack on either his larder or his purse. Then there was Sir Adam Bannister, who in 1330 fell out with the Prior of Lancaster Abbey, big style. Bannister was in trouble with the law so often that half the time he couldn't be bothered turning up at court. Despite being a keen advocate of poaching himself, he couldn't be doing with other people trespassing on his land. So when Lancastrian monks started crossing his land to reach their tithe barn, he took the law into his own hands. A complaint was sent on behalf of the prior to King Edward III, explaining that Adam Bannister, knight, took the prior at Poulton with force and arms, and brought him therefrom to Thornton, and imprisoned him there, and maltreated him, and assaulted his men and servants there, and beat, imprisoned, wounded, and maltreated them, and did other enormous things to him, to the grave damage of the said prior. There's a lot more history to Poulton le Fylde, but we're bored of it now. Click like and subscribe, and we'll tell you the rest of it another time.